Welcome to AP Biology. Today's video is going to be on polygenic traits. Polygenic traits are basically traits that are produced by a combination of several genes interacting with one another. Skin color is an example of that. In GWAS studies, which stands for Genome-Wide Association Studies, they have identified 26 or more genes right now that are associated with skin color. And what we tend to see is darker skin colors near the equator and lighter skin colors as you move away from the equator. And the reason for this is twofold. One, you got to have darker skin near the equator to protect the folic acid that's running through your veins. Otherwise, your folic acid gets damaged and you end up with a bunch of birth defects. And as you move further away from the equator, you need lighter skin to be able to produce enough vitamin D that you don't have any negative effects from not having enough vitamin D, like rickets and other issues. So skin color really has evolved based on environmental conditions. If you try to look at how skin color might be passed on, imagine if there were 3 genes for skin color and they only came in dominant or recessive. And the dominant created the darker coloration and recessive created the lighter coloration. And they were kind of incompletely dominant. So if you had all dark genes, you would produce darker skin. And as you had fewer and fewer of those dark genes, you would produce lighter and lighter skin until you had no dark genes, and then you would produce really light skin. So that's kind of how skin color works. It's much more complicated than that, but all of these polygenic traits kind of work in the same way. They're blending the genes together to produce a particular appearance. Eye color works the same way. There's 3 major genes that we know of that are very influential on eye color, but there's another 30 or more that have an influence on eye color. And so you can produce lots of different eye colors, and the rim and near the pupil can be different colors. And so there's lots of variety that can come from a variety of genes when it comes to eye color. We tend to see these eye colors localized in the same places where we see the darker skin coloration. So a lot of these pigment genes are going to be associated with skin color, eye color, hair color. So with the darker skin, a lot of times you see darker eyes and darker hair. It just goes hand in hand because the same gene is involved in producing all 3 traits. Hair color is the same way. There's lots of genes involved, but there's a few major ones that have a big influence. And so, like I said before, the darker skin, the darker eyes, the darker hair kind of go hand in hand. You'll notice, though, the lighter skin and the lighter eyes and the lighter hair tend to be focused more towards Northern Europe, where those colorations were more beneficial in producing vitamin D and maybe some other characteristics as well. There's lots and lots of genes associated with height. And you can see one of the things we see is that men tend to be taller than women. And there's so many genes associated with height, we think maybe more than 700. And so lots of factors can influence your height. And so can your environment. If you're malnourished, you might never reach your actual height that you're supposed to get to. We see this a lot in North Korea. Here's an interesting study. In 1960, North Koreans and South Koreans were the same height prior to the Korean War. And then in 2012, the average 20-year-old male in South Korea is now 7 inches taller than the 20-year-old male in North Korea. And the reason for this is in North Korea, all the males are malnourished. They don't get enough to eat while they're growing up. South Korea is a lot like America now. It's very, uh, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of industry, a lot of business, they're making lots of computer chips. They have lots going on in South Korea. North Korea is very third world still. They don't even have electricity and plumbing and all those things to all the houses and people that live there. And so it's very uh, third world still, and they don't get enough to eat. And so their males tend to be really short. For example, this is a typical uh, American compared to a North Korean compared to a South Korean. So there's a major difference, and all the North Korean males are kind of the same height. If you compare them all together, if you look at this picture, I mean, they're like clones of one another. They're all 5'3", and they just they lack nutrition while they're growing up, and even the people in the army lack nutrition while they're growing up, and so they end up short. IQ is another example um, where we think that genes play a role, and there's lots and lots of genes involved, but environment plays a role as well. We think that the environment might play as much as 15% of your intelligence. So, you might have an IQ of 100 genetically, but it can be bumped up to maybe 115 or go down to 85 depending on the environmental conditions that you're exposed to. Another effect that we see, so with polygenic traits, you have multiple genes affecting one characteristics. We see another situation where what we call pleiotropy. And with pleiotropy, you have one gene that has multiple effects. An example of that, we have a defective gene that causes cystic fibrosis. It messes up a chloride transport channel in our bodies, and it has multiple effects on lots of different characteristics in your body. It affects your liver, it affects your pancreas, it affects your lungs, your sweat glands, your digestive tract. Lots of effects just from one screwed up gene. Okay? And so that's pleiotropy. Pleiotropy is kind of the opposite of polygenics. So it's one gene having multiple effects, where with polygenics, it's multiple genes affecting one characteristic.